Welcome to Hawn's Mill. This place is very special to me. Let me introduce myself a little bit. My name is Janell Jenkins. Some of my background, I have a keen interest in this site and have done a lot of deep research into the people of Hawn's Mill over a couple of decades. And I'm a direct descendant of Thomas McBride, who is buried here. I'm also a direct descendant of Harrison Sevier, who was a non-member that lived about 4 miles that way, who was invited to join the mob but refused, ended up leaving with the McBrides, joining the church, and ended up settling in Utah. I'm also a descendant of Armstead Moffat, who was at Far West during this time period. And let's see, who's the other one? McBride, Moffat. I've got another one. Oh, James Emmett. James Emmett was also over in the Far West area during this time period. I am actually a double descendant of Thomas McBride because I descend through both his son James as well as his daughter Dorcas. So I'm going to give you an account of what happened during this time period, and then we'll go from there. Jacob Hawn operated a water gristmill business on Shoal Creek. Shoal Creek ran through his 40-acre property. He was not a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. By October 1838, a small community had developed near the mill, which consisted of about 10 cabins, a blacksmith shop, and a yard. There was a plan to add a store to the site. At least 30 families living in the intermediate area. Early in October in Davies County, a large number of Kirtland Camp members were sent to settle in Davies County. Conflict then escalated between the Saints and the other residents who were opposed to such a large number of Saints immigrating into their county. Gallatin and Millport were raided and burned by Latter-day Saint forces from Far West in an effort to quell mob activities. Alarmed Davies County residents fled to Livingston County for help. Specific antagonism developed against the Hawn's Mill community after a few Caldwell County Latter-day Saint dissidents moved into Livingston County and made false reports about Latter-day Saint intentions. One of those dissidents was Robert White. He had become disillusioned with the church, abandoned his own milling business, which was located near Jacob Hawn's Mill, and moved to Livingston County. In Latter-day Saint James McBride's autobiography, he said that, quote, Robert White had turned traitor and given the attackers all the information he could concerning the Latter-day Saints' families and situations, end of quote. Latter-day Saint David Lewis, who lived on 80 acres just east of Jacob Hawn's property, wrote in his journal, so that would be the 80 acres that way, quote, the people became so alarmed to see so many people gather to one place, all of one religion and one politics. They raised many false accusations against us in order to have us drove away from the state. Previous to this transaction, the people living on Grand River began to come over to Shoal Creek Settlement, here, where the Mormons lived, and drove off our cattle and made some threats that they intended to come and burn down the mill. As hostilities continued to increase, Jacob Hawn was sent to Far West to get Joseph Smith's counsel concerning what the Hawn's Mill residents should do. On Sunday, October 28th, at Hawn's Mill, a small wagon group stopped who were on their way to Far West. This was a small, delayed, detached group from Kirtland Camp, led by Joseph Young, Brigham Young's brother. Some of them camped in the yard near the blacksmith shop, right over there. At the same time as the group was arriving, a council meeting was being held to determine the best course of action. In the council meeting, Jacob Hawn reported that Joseph Smith's counsel was for them to stay and try to maintain the mill, and that they would be cowards if they did not. The council thus decided to organize guard duty to protect the mill in the event a small group of men would come to burn down the mill. 2 days later, on Tuesday, October 30th, at about 4 p.m., a vigilante Livingston County force numbering about 250 men attacked the community. David Evans, the Hawn's Mill branch president, ran towards them waving his hat and calling for peace. Alerted to their approach, most of the 50 women and children fled into the woods to the south, while most of the 36 men and boys headed to the blacksmith shop. Unfortunately, the building structure had widely spaced logs that made it easy for the attackers to fire inside. The shop became a death trap. The attackers fired about 100 rifles into the building. According to their own account, the attacking force fired 1,600 shots during the attack. The Livingston County force that attacked the community consisted of men mostly from Davies, Livingston, and Ray counties, including Missouri State Legislator Major Janell Ashby and Caldwell County Latter-day Saint dissenter Robert White. After the initial attack, several of those who had been wounded or had surrendered were shot dead. Some attackers entered the shop and found 3 boys hiding under the blacksmith bellows, and they were shot. Houses were robbed, wagons, tents, and clothing were stolen, and horses and livestock were driven off, leaving the surviving women and children destitute. Early the next morning, 14 of the 15 dead were carried one at a time on a large plank and slid into a partially dug well near the blacksmith shop. The mass grave was then covered with straw and a thin layer of dirt. Amanda Barnes Smith later wrote of the burial, quote, "We trusted their bodies to God," end of quote. David Lewis's brother Benjamin was buried on David's farm and later reburied in a nearby graveyard. 2 mortally wounded Latter-day Saints were buried later. As a result of the attack on the Hawn's Mill community, 15 men and 2 boys died. 13 men, 1 woman, and 1 boy were wounded and survived. At least 4 Missourians were wounded. Robert White said, "The militia lived off the country and lived fat too. The Mormon cattle and hogs had been turned into the fields and were fat and fine. The mill furnished plenty of breadstuffs, and there were other articles of provisions to be had for the taking." In December 1838, Major Janell Ashby of the Missouri State Legislature, who had been a member of the vigilante Livingston County force that attacked the community, in his statement to the Missouri House of Representatives, claimed that, quote, "reports by dissenting Mormons led to the Battle of Hawn's Mill," end of quote. Life during the winter of 1838-1839 became day-to-day survival. Most families banded together until they could make arrangements to leave the state. Jacob Hawn sold the mill to the Fryer brothers and eventually immigrated to Oregon. The Fryer brothers leased the site to their brother-in-law Charles R. Ross, who moved onto the property February 1st, 1839. He finished filling in the mass grave the following spring. I feel like I would like to acknowledge the people that were killed and wounded. The 14 men and boys were buried in the James Houston blacksmith shop's unfinished dry well. Elias Benner, 43, born in Venango, Pennsylvania, spouse Eliza Kramer, 8 children, 40 acres located on North Mud Creek, had a sawmill, killed in the blacksmith shop. Some of his family stayed in the Midwest. Some descendants still live in the Bramer, Missouri area. John Briers was of Richland County, Ohio. He was a Caldwell County resident, killed in the blacksmith shop. Alexander Campbell, about 35 years old, born in Rutherford, Tennessee, spouse Polly Brown, 40 acres located near Tatesville, Ray County, Missouri, killed in the blacksmith shop. Simon Cox, young man from Indiana that lived with the Jacob Myers family, mortally wounded in the blacksmith shop. Artemisia Sidney Myers said, quote, Simon Cox lay there with 4 bullets having passed through his kidneys. He said to Mother, "All I want is a bowl of sweet milk and a feather bed to lie on." He told us to be faithful and said to me, "Be a good girl and obey your parents." End quote. Josiah Fuller Sr., 35, born in New York, spouse Catherine Lauer, 5 children, 40 acres, located about 1.5 miles from Hawn's Mill, killed in the blacksmith shop. His family went to Nauvoo, some of them staying in the Midwest for a while, then emigrating west. Austin Hammer Sr., 34, born in Randolph County, North Carolina, spouse Nancy Jane Elston, 7 children, mortally wounded while defending the blacksmith shop. While wounded, he was dragged from the blacksmith shop where he was stripped of his boots. After the ordeal, he was taken to Jacob Hawn's home, where he died around midnight. He received 7 bullets, and both thighs were broken. He was the nephew of John York, who also died. 80 acres located several miles from Hawn's Mill. His family immigrated to Utah. John Lee, killed in the blacksmith shop. Thomas McBride Sr., 62, born in Loudoun County, Virginia, spouse Catherine John, 15 children. Some have attributed Thomas as serving in the Revolutionary War. Actually, it was his father that served in the Virginia 5th Regiment as a sharpshooter. 2 separate 40-acre parcels. One parcel was about 3/4 miles east of the mill, and the other parcel was about 3 miles west of the mill. 6 of Thomas's married children and their families lived in this general area. He was the Grand River Township Justice of the Peace. Thomas' son James recounts, quote, "My father came home from meeting with the brethren at the mill. He talked with me and told me the arrangements made. He was called to help form the guard. I was sick at the time with the every other day ague, and Father said that on my well day I should take his place with the guard, and that he would guard on the day that I was sick, that with himself and me he wished to fill one man's place. Father was in good spirits, and his countenance wore a cheerful expression. Having shaved himself in his usual style, leaving side beards, and taking with him his gun and blankets, started on his return to the mill to join the rest of the guard." End of quote. He was brutally mutilated and killed by Jacob Rogers after escaping the blacksmith shop. Most of his family immigrated to Utah. Some stayed in the Midwest. Levi Newton Merrick, 30, born in Bridgeport, Vermont, spouse Belindia Clark Eldridge, 4 children, Kirtland camp member, killed in the blacksmith shop. His son Charles was mortally wounded. His family immigrated to Utah. William Napier Sr., 43, born in Vermont, spouse Ruth Hogue, 5 children. He was a Caldwell County resident, killed in the blacksmith shop, shot in the head and chest. George Spencer Richards, 15, born in Richmond, Massachusetts, son of Phineas and Wealthy Dewey Richards, Kirtland camp member. He traveled with the Joseph Young family. Joseph Young was his father's cousin. Joseph Young asked George if he would rather hold the Young's fussy baby while Jane cooked supper or stand guard duty. He volunteered to stand guard duty. Killed in the blacksmith shop, shot in the head. His family immigrated to Utah. Sardius Washington Smith, 10, born in Amherst, Ohio, son of Warren and Amanda Melissa Barnes, Kirtland camp member. He went into the blacksmith shop at the time of the attack and hid behind the bellows. After being discovered, he was shot in the head. He was the son of Warren Smith, who also died. His family immigrated to Utah. Warren Smith, 44, born in Beckett, Massachusetts, spouse Amanda Melissa Barnes, 5 children, Kirtland camp member, mortally wounded in the blacksmith shop, and died shortly after the Missourians stormed the building. He was the father of Sardius Smith, who also died, and Alma Smith, who had his hip shot out. His family immigrated to Utah. John York Jr., 62, was born in Randolph County, North Carolina. Spouse, Hannah Hammer. 11 children. 40 acres located several miles northeast of Hawn's Mill, mortally wounded while trying to escape from the blacksmith shop, being shot in the head. He was the uncle of Austin Hammer, who also died. His family moved to Indiana. One man died at the same time and was buried elsewhere. Benjamin Franklin Lewis, 33, born in Pendleton, South Carolina. Spouse, Johanna Ryan, 7 children. He was a resident. He was mortally wounded while trying to make his escape from the blacksmith shop. He died a few hours later, after bearing a strong testimony of the gospel. He also asked his wife to remain with the body of the church. He was buried the day after the attack by his brother David on David's property on the south side of the creek. Later, the county court suggested that his body be moved to a nearby cemetery, which was done. Most of his family immigrated to Utah. Some stayed in the Midwest. 1 man and 1 boy were mortally wounded. Hiram Abbott, 25, born in Norwich, Connecticut, the son of Rufus and Ann Owen Abbott. 80 acres, located in Rockford Township in Caldwell County. Hiram Abbott and Ellis Ames were in the process of putting up a store. On the day of the attack, Hiram Abbott and Ryle Ames were cutting each other's hair as the vigilantes approached. Hiram Abbott was mortally wounded escaping the blacksmith shop. He was cared for by David Lewis for 5 weeks and was then moved to his father's home and died. Some of his family stayed in the Midwest. Some immigrated to Utah and California. Charles Merrick, 9, born in Bridgeport, Vermont, the son of Levi and Philandria Clark Eldridge Merrick, Kirtland Camp member. He was mortally wounded, receiving 3 wounds while trying to escape the blacksmith shop. He died the 25th of November, 1838, and was buried in a nearby cemetery. His father, Levi Merrick, also died. His family immigrated to Utah. 13 men, 1 boy and 1 woman were wounded and survived. Jacob Fouts, 37, wounded in the thigh while in the blacksmith shop. Jacob Hawn, 34, wounded while trying to escape the blacksmith shop. Charles Jameson, 35, wounded while trying to escape the blacksmith shop. Nathan Kinsman Knight, 34, while yelling for quarters, his finger was shot off and another finger injured. In making his escape, he was wounded in his leg and back. Isaac Laney, 23, wounded in 10 places while trying to escape from the blacksmith shop. 4 balls passed entirely through his body, leaving 8 holes. Grazed by 2 more bullets, resulting in flesh wounds to each arm. Tarleton Lewis, 33, wounded in the shoulder while trying to escape from the blacksmith shop. Gilman Merrill, 30, wounded while trying to escape from the blacksmith shop. George Myers, 31, wounded in the right shoulder while trying to escape from the blacksmith shop. He never fully recovered. Jacob Myers Jr., 24, wounded while trying to escape from the blacksmith shop. His leg was broken by a bullet that lodged halfway between his knee and ankle, received a flesh wound to the thigh. A year later, his leg was amputated due to his injuries. Jacob Potts, 25, wounded twice in the right leg while trying to escape from the blacksmith shop. Hiram Rathbun, 18, wounded in his right leg, remained a cripple for the rest of his life. Alma Lamoni Smith, 6, while hiding behind the bellows in the blacksmith shop, was shot at close range, wounding him in the hip. He fully recovered. Mary Steadwell, wounded in the hand while trying to escape as the attack began. John Walker, wounded in his right arm while in the blacksmith shop. William Yoakum, 33, wounded in the face and leg while trying to escape from the blacksmith shop. His leg was later amputated. There are 4 known wounded Missourians. Alan England, wounded in the thigh. John Hart, wounded in the arm. John Renfro, thumb shot off. Jacob Rogers, who ran a ferry on Grand River, shot in the hip and remained a cripple. James McBride, in his autobiography, said, quote, "I feel to acknowledge the hand of God in all things and bear testimony of the truth of the gospel of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints." End of quote. In the Doctrine and Covenants, section 124:54, quote, For I am the Lord your God, and will save all those of your brethren who have been pure in heart and have been slain in the land of Missouri, saith the Lord. End of quote. And isn't it wonderful that it's not 1838 anymore? As I have done research, I have researched these people. I've also researched families of the Missourians. And the good news is, as I have worked in family search, and I'm looking at the families, that descendants of some of those who attacked the mill, some of their descendants have joined the church. And it just makes my heart so happy to see that. That as time has gone by, that descendants have joined the church. They love their families. They do history on their ancestors, and they do the temple work for their ancestors that they love. And to me, it's just a wonderful thing how God loves all his children, and he wants them all to return to him. I'm so grateful for the plan of salvation. I'm grateful for the atonement of Jesus Christ, because the atonement's a real thing, and people can repent. There were mistakes made by the Latter-day Saints. There were mistakes made by Missourians. We don't live in a perfect world, and things happen, and situations happen. But I'm just so grateful for our Savior and for the plan of salvation that helps us move forward and helps us to heal. And I say these things in the name of Jesus Christ, amen. I'd like to point out maybe a few sites that are traditionally Community of Christ. Years ago, I think it was Ron Romig, the archivist, created a map, and so what I'm pointing out is what I've seen on his map, but they're saying the mill was generally somewhere in this area. Up there is a little plateau. That's where Jacob Hawn's cabin was, and so when they were escaping across the mill dam, wherever that was around here, and some of the bodies were taken up to Jacob Hawn's house, and some of them ran up. There's a ravine over there, ran up the ravine. Some of the first-hand accounts talk about that. The blacksmith shop was over in this area somewhere. The well, I couldn't figure out how you could get 14 bodies in a well. I had tried to do the math to figure out how that works. Well, come to find out that it was a partially dug dry well that was being dug for the blacksmith shop. And I had a Missourian tell me that an old way that they used to dig the well is they would scoop, 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 and so until they hit water. And then when they hit water, then that's when they would rock up. That's when they would start to rock up the well, and then they would backfill as they rocked it up. And so they hadn't hit water. That's why it's important that it's a dry well. So it was deep enough that when they took the planks to carry them to this place to bury them, that the term that was used is their bodies tumbled in, and so that makes sense to me. And then to throw some straw and a thin layer of dirt over the top. It's not like a cylinder going down. That's how I was first imagining that, but it was maybe more of a trench-like situation. So I thought that was kind of interesting. The Community of Christ map, they thought maybe the 10 cabins were over along that tree line, and then of course the yard where would be like this meadow type of area. The detached group from Kirtland Camp, the main Kirtland Camp group arrived at Far West the earlier part of the month. And this group that came to Hawn's Mill, they had broken off from the main group at the Mississippi River. And some of them wanted to come to Hawn's Mill because they had friends here and they wanted to stay with their friends. And so the group that came in on that Sunday, the ones that didn't go and stay with their friends camped in the meadow or the yard area, in their tents and their wagons. And so, like, some of those that were wounded and killed were part of that group that just happened to be at the wrong place at the wrong time, so to speak. And let's see if there's anything. I've had people ask me about the extermination order. The extermination order was issued on the 27th by Governor Boggs, which was on Saturday, and that was in response to Crooked River battle. And the group that was in Livingston County, they had not got that. They were acting on their own. They weren't acting from the extermination order. That wasn't part of what happened. And as far as I can tell from my research, the reason that attack happened, it was Robert White and a couple of other dissidents that went over to Livingston County while they were upset about what was going on in Davies County, and then him convincing them to attack the mill. Are there any questions?
I have heard that the church actually did some ground penetrating radar to try and find the well, but they never did find that well. And that it's interesting, but is there any more information on that?
I was actually out here a couple of times when they were here, and I did see some of that, they didn't find the well. According to Benjamin Pickles, that was the curator at that time, he is now the manager for the Palmyra restoration that's happening right now. I think that they can rest in peace. There's a beautiful spirit here. I just really love the peace and the beautiful spirit. I have had some wonderful experiences here. And one experience I'd like to share with you if there's time. Is that okay? When we first moved to Missouri in 2000, we joined MMFF because I wanted to learn all I possibly could about what really happened here. Not what people say, but what really happened. And we hadn't been here very long, and I got a phone call from a lady, and she said, "Hi, are you Janell Jenkins?" And I'm like, "Yes." And she's like, "My name's Peggy McBride." And I says, "Well, that's a really good name." And she said, "I'm the wife of Junior McBride, and I live in LaPorte, Iowa. And we are descendants of Thomas McBride Jr. And we would like to meet you at Hawn's Mill." And I was like, "I would love to meet you." And so they came down from Iowa. I came up. We were living in Liberty at the time. And I couldn't believe when I saw them. They are not members of the church. When my McBride family went to Quincy, Illinois, and then they went up to Nauvoo, and then the Saints were leaving Nauvoo to travel to Utah, Thomas McBride Jr., when they were in Farmington, Iowa, he went into town to get some supplies or something, and because he was a Mormon, some of the folks thought it would be really fun to put a noose around his neck and string him up. And so that's what they did, and they threw a rope over a rafter, and they pulled on the rope enough that he would just be on his tippy toes, and they were laughing and thinking that was really funny. And then one of the other old settlers in the area came and saw what was going on and cut him down. Well, he died 2 weeks later, and of course the family thinks, well, he got strung up, that's probably why he died. Anyway, his wife and his 2 kids stayed in Iowa, and then and so this group that I would, Junior and Peggy and his sister Erlene, when they came and I saw them coming in, they looked just like my family. My heart just about leaped out of my chest. And I just felt such a close, warm connection with them immediately. And we exchanged genealogy on each tree. At that particular time, Family Search was a new thing. And so I took their information and was able to input that in Family Search. And then we saw how we were connected to each other. So that was really cool. And we kept in correspondence, and they asked me, "Are you a member of the church?" And I'm like, "Yes, I'm a member of the church." And they're like, "We're not." And I was so surprised because it had not entered my mind. I grew up, all the people I knew were LDS. I grew up in the West, as far as my little small mind was concerned, that's what I knew. That was my world, and that's what I knew. And so it had never occurred to me that some of the children that didn't go west were here, and I had cousins, and I was related to people that aren't that far away from me. I've also had that same experience with some of my other ancestors, like Armstead Moffat. He went to Utah, but his mother and stepfather and the rest of his children live in this area, and they're my cousins. And it's like really cool. I love it. So when I look around, I see people, "You're my brother, my sister, you're my cousin." And I did not realize how closely we can be really linked to each other and not know it.
Now the report that Jacob gave to the camp of what Joseph had said wasn't really what Joseph said, right?
Well, now it depends on which account you read, because there were 2 or 3 eyewitnesses there that heard the conversation. So just depending, everybody has their own point of view.
There's a lot of hearsay.
There's a lot of hearsay, and everyone has their own point of view and their own take on any particular situation. So one point of view, or one person's account, was Joseph Smith was having a conversation with John Killam, that was the captain of the militia, Caldwell County Militia, because they were trying to figure out the defense of Far West after all this jazz going on up in Daviess County, and of course all the stuff that was rigmarole that was going on. And while they were in this conversation, Jacob Hawn shows up, and he wants to talk to Joseph Smith, and so Joseph stops talking to Mr. Killiam and turns to talk to Jacob Hawn, and Jacob Hawn says, can what should we do about, the people in Hawn's Mill want to know, what they need to do. And he says to them, "Come into Far West." And Jacob Hawn says, "Well, no, we think that we can guard the mill. We think we can guard the mill and keep it," because Joseph Smith, a few weeks in September, he had told the people at DeWitt, try to hold DeWitt, and not when they had the siege at DeWitt, and try to hold that. Well, they tried for 2 weeks and they couldn't, because the forces were just too strong for them, and so then they came into Far West. And so I don't know what was going on in Jacob Hawn's head, how he was interpreting things, but Joseph Smith said, "Lives will be lost." And Jacob Hawn says, "But we think we can guard the mill. We think we can hold it." And then he says, "Well, if you think you can hold it, go ahead." And so then Jacob Hawn left. And then afterwards, one of the fellows that was there in the group says, "Why did you say that? Why did you tell them that?" And he says, "If I would have told them anything else, they would have said that I was a tyrant.
But to use the term, if you leave, you're cowards, that really kind of puts a damper on somebody's spirit to think, well, I don't want to be a coward, so I'm going to stay here and defend it, right?
Yeah. Well, and there was talk going on at Far West about we need to fight, we need to defend our position and our situation here. So there was that kind of rhetoric was going around. So that wasn't unusual. And during that time period too, to call somebody a coward is a pretty big insult. And after Jacob Hawn came and gave his report, and the people at Hawn's Mill thought, okay, if Joseph Smith endorses that, then we're gonna do it. The women even volunteered to help make bullets for the men. They're like, well, we'll do our part. So it's very complicated, and all the little tapestry and all the little pieces, the nuances. It's really fascinating and interesting. And for me personally, I have had all of my questions that I wondered about have been answered, and I feel at peace with what I know and understand. Yes?
In your research, did you find any of the men that were here, that were killed, did they have any connection with the Crooked River battle?
Not that I know of. The only connection that I can even think of would be Jonathan Taylor Packer owned property next door to Thomas McBride, but he owned a lot of land parcels, and so he had some parcels in Ray County, he had some parcels over there, so I don't know where he resided, but I had one of his descendants tell me that he participated in the Crooked River battle. But I don't know if he resided here or not. That would be the only stretch.
They killed these people for no reason. It wasn't because of the Crooked River battle.
No.
Used that excuse,
No.
But it really wasn't.
No, it didn't have anything to do with the Crooked River battle. We have a lot of upset people up in Davies County running over to Livingston County wanting help, and those people were upset, and they wanted help. They didn't like seeing so many Mormons moving into their county, and it's interesting because that was the last of the large group that was sent up there. So things probably would have kind of settled down if they could have just hung on a little longer, maybe. But yeah, the Davies County people wanted the Mormons to go to your own county because Caldwell County was created for the Mormons. And so they were like, we want you to go to your own county that's been created for you.
Do you know which direction the mob came in?
Yes. They came from the north. They met at Woolsey's farm. That's where they congregated before they came down to make the attack, and that's northeast.
Basically following the road we see today?
I don't know how the old roads went. I just know they came down from the north.
Okay.
It was no short ride. I mean, to us, it seems like it's not that far to go, but they were horseback.
Right.
And so they had to come a long way, out of their way, away from Davies County to attack these people.
Maybe that's why it took them till 4 o'clock to get here.
Yeah.
Aren't we so happy that things are a lot better now? That was just the new church, baby church just getting launched, and now it's wonderful. Okay, I guess that's all.
Thank you.
Regarding that, where they came from, I had read a report too in Sacred Places that they're about 1.5 miles, 2 miles east of Breckenridge.
Mm-hmm.
So Breckenridge is a little bit north of 36. However far down we are from 36, they had to come down that distance. So it wasn't a walk in the park. They had to travel a little bit,
That's a long way.
Yeah. So I do appreciate that 184 years ago isn't us, you know. So I would encourage you guys when you leave here to go and take a moment and ponder and give appreciation to what our forebears did for us. And you mentioned another group that came in that was just passing by. That would have been the Kirtland camp. The last group of saints to leave Kirtland. They're coming to Far West. Now I had family in that camp. So when I figured, I put two together years ago, I thought, I'm glad my family didn't stop here at Hawn's Mill. You know, and I feel bad telling you that, but
You might not have been around.
I know. I've been living in Iowa. So thank you. And then we take appreciation to think that this is the exact spot, same type of trees, the same land, the same air, same skies, the same smells and scents that they would have had, you know, this time, you know, 184 years ago. So that's